8 months after signing the divorce papers, Adrian Blackwood thought he had erased his ex-wife from his life forever. To him, Elena was nothing more than a mistake he had buried beneath champagne nights, luxury hotels, and billion-dollar boardrooms. He had convinced himself she was weak, replaceable, and broken. After all, he was the man with the empire, the private jets, the powerful friends, and the $10 billion deal that was about to make him untouchable. But one rainy evening, outside a quiet hospital in Manhattan, Adrian saw something that stopped his heart. Elena. Pregnant. Not slightly, not barely noticeable, pregnant enough for the truth to hit him like a bullet. She never had the abortion. The child he had demanded she get rid of was still alive. For the first time in 8 months, Adrian felt something colder than fear crawl up his spine. He had thrown her out with nothing. He had humiliated her in court. He had believed she disappeared because she had lost everything. But Elena had not disappeared. She had rebuilt. And Adrian was about to discover that the woman he once treated like a burden had become the silent force controlling the biggest deal of his life. The next morning, he walked into the tallest glass tower in the city, ready to finalize the contract that would save his company from collapse. Investors were waiting, cameras were flashing, lawyers stood ready with gold-trimmed documents. Then the boardroom doors opened. Elena stepped inside. Calm, elegant, powerful. Adrian froze as every executive stood in respect. Because Elena was not there as a guest. She owned the company. The same company about to sign his $10 billion deal. And the moment her eyes met his, Adrian understood the nightmare had only begun. He tried to speak, tried to explain, tried to apologize, but Elena did not raise her voice. She did not cry, she did not beg. She simply placed one folder on the table. Inside was every lie he had told, every hidden debt, every illegal transfer, every betrayal he thought money had buried forever. By sunset, the deal was dead. By midnight, his investors had vanished. By morning, his accounts were frozen, his mansion was seized, and the man who once called her worthless was standing outside in the rain with nowhere to go. But Elena's revenge was not loud. It was surgical. She did not destroy him because she hated him. She destroyed him because he had mistaken her silence for weakness. And when Adrian finally came crawling back, begging to see the child he had once rejected, Elena gave him one final answer that shattered what was left of his pride. Because some women do not come back for love. They come back to collect everything they were owed. The rain that morning felt different from every storm Adrian had ever watched from behind tinted windows. It was not the kind of rain that made Manhattan look romantic. It was sharp, cold, and humiliating, the kind that found its way beneath the collar of a $5,000 suit and reminded a man that cloth was not armor. He stood beneath the black iron awning of what had once been his own townhouse, clutching a leather overnight bag in one hand and a dead phone in the other. Behind him, 2 security officers changed the locks. Not his staff, not his doormen, not men who called him Mr. Blackwood with frightened respect. Court-appointed security. One of them avoided his eyes as he carried out a sealed box marked personal effects. Inside were the remnants of a life Adrian had mistaken for permanent. Cufflinks, watches, framed magazine covers, a crystal award from Forbes, photographs from charity galas, and one silver picture frame turned face down. He knew which photograph was in that frame. Elena in a cream dress on their wedding day, standing beside him under a canopy of white roses. She had been smiling at the camera, while Adrian had been looking over her shoulder at the mayor, the senators, the investors. Even in that frozen moment, even in the picture he had once displayed like proof of his perfect life, he had not truly been looking at her. Now he could not stop seeing her. Elena in the hospital rain. Elena in the boardroom. Elena placing the folder on the table, as if she had not just placed a blade against the throat of his empire. The door shut behind him with a final click. Adrian turned around. For the first time in years, no driver waited at the curb. His Rolls-Royce had been repossessed at dawn, taken so quietly that he had only noticed when he looked outside and saw an empty rectangle of wet pavement where Power used to sit. His penthouse account was frozen. His private club membership was suspended pending review. 3 banks had declined his calls. His attorney, Marcus Vale, had sent one message at 5:42 a.m. "Do not contact me directly. All communication must go through the appointed financial examiner." Adrian had laughed when he read it. A dry, ugly sound. Marcus had stood beside him during the divorce and stripped Elena bare with smiling precision. Marcus had called her unstable, ungrateful, emotionally manipulative, a woman trying to profit from a man's success. Adrian had sat there while it happened, hands folded, face calm, watching Elena stare at the courtroom floor. He remembered her dress that day. Navy blue, high collar, no jewelry except her wedding ring, which she took off only after the judge signed the final decree. He remembered the way she had looked up once. Not at Marcus. At him. There had been no hatred in her eyes then. That was what haunted him now. Hatred would have been easier. Hatred burned loud and obvious. Elena had looked at him like someone carefully memorizing the shape of a closed door. He had mistaken that look for surrender. Now he understood. She had been measuring the lock. His phone buzzed suddenly, and for one wild second hope flashed through him. But it was not an investor, not a friend, not a lifeline. It was a news alert. Blackwood Global shares HALTD after fraud ALLEGATIONS and collapsed VOSS Meridian Partnership. He stared at the headline until the words blurred. Below it, a photograph showed him from yesterday morning, entering Voss Meridian Tower with his chin lifted and his expression carved from arrogance. The article did not show what happened 39 minutes later when Elena walked into the boardroom and every person stood. Every person except him. He had been too stunned to move. Voss Meridian, he should have known. The name had been on the documents for months, but the company was famously private, its ownership hidden behind trusts, family offices, and silent directors. Adrian had been told the chairwoman preferred anonymity. He had joked that anyone with that much power probably had no face, only signatures. But she had a face. A face he once woke beside. A face he once made cry in a kitchen at 2:00 a.m. while rain hit the windows, and she held a small white pregnancy test in a trembling hand. The memory came without mercy. He saw their old kitchen, all marble and polished brass. Elena barefoot, wearing one of his shirts, her dark hair loose over her shoulders. He remembered the way her mouth curved when she whispered, "I'm pregnant." For a moment, only one moment, she had looked so happy that the room seemed younger. Then he ruined it. "Elena, this is impossible timing." That was what he had said first, not "I love you," not "we'll figure it out," not "are you okay?" Impossible timing. She had blinked, as if she did not understand the language he was speaking. "The doctor said I'm 8 weeks," she told him softly. "I wanted to surprise you after the Mercer dinner, but I couldn't wait." "The Mercer deal is in 5 months," he said. "The hearings are next quarter. We are under review by 3 international lenders. Do you understand what this kind of distraction could do?" This kind of distraction, her voice cracked. He had paced in front of the island, already calculating optics, schedules, risks. There were contracts that required leadership stability, shareholders who hated uncertainty, rivals waiting for weakness. He had built Blackwood Global from nothing, or at least that was the version he sold to magazines. He could not let diapers and doctor appointments become headlines. "Elena, be practical." She placed one hand over her stomach, not dramatically, not to accuse him, but because something inside her had already become real. "You always ask me to be practical when you mean obedient," she said. That sentence had cut him, not because it was false, but because it was too accurate. So he struck back with the only weapon men like him trust, when truth appears. Coldness. I am not ready to be a father, he said, and you are not ready to be a mother. The light left her face slowly. He remembered that now as he stood in the rain with no car, no home, and no empire. He had watched the light go out and had still continued. By the following week, he had arranged a private clinic appointment without asking her. By the next month, when she refused, he had moved into the guest suite. By the next quarter, his lawyers had begun building the divorce case. Adrian had told himself Elena was forcing his hand. He had told himself she wanted to trap him. He had told himself that love was a weakness successful men outgrew. The cruelest lies were not the ones he told the court. They were the ones he needed in order to sleep. A taxi splashed water against the curb. Adrian stepped back too late, the bottom of his trousers soaked through. The security officer at the door gave him a look that was almost pity. Almost. That made it worse. He walked because there was nowhere else to go. The city that once opened for him now moved around him without recognition. People hurried beneath umbrellas. Screens flashed his name. A delivery cyclist nearly clipped his shoulder and shouted at him to watch where he was going. At the corner, a homeless man sat beneath a plastic sheet, holding a paper cup. For years, Adrian had passed men like him without seeing them. He had considered poverty a failure of strategy, a lack of discipline, a refusal to become useful. Now the man looked up at Adrian's ruined suit and smiled with one missing tooth. Bad morning. Adrian almost snapped. Instead, he kept walking. His hands were shaking by the time he reached the lobby of the St. Aurelia Hotel, where he had once reserved entire floors for investors. The doorman recognized him and stiffened. Adrian took that as encouragement until the manager appeared before he reached the desk. "Mr. Blackwood," she said carefully, "I'm afraid we're unable to extend credit at this time." "I don't need credit," his voice came out hoarse. "I have accounts." Her expression did not move. "Those accounts have been frozen." "I have a suite here under corporate hospitality." "That arrangement has been terminated." "By whom?" She hesitated. He already knew. "Vos Meridian. Elena." He gripped the handle of his bag so tightly his knuckles went pale. "I made this hotel what it is." "No, sir," the manager said quietly. "You held events here." The words landed harder than they should have. He wanted to tell her she was fired, ruined, finished. But he no longer controlled anything inside that lobby, not the staff, not the rooms, not even the way people looked at him. So he left. Outside, the rain had slowed to mist. His reflection appeared in the hotel glass. Wet hair, red eyes, expensive suit collapsing around him like a costume after the play had ended. Behind that reflection, for one flickering second, he saw another version of himself. 26 years old, hungry, brilliant, standing in a cheap rented office with cracked windows and a second-hand desk, telling Elena he would own the city one day. She had believed him. That was the first debt. He had met Elena Voss at a university lecture he was not supposed to attend. He was there because the guest speaker was a venture capitalist, and Adrian had planned to corner him afterward with a pitch for a logistics platform he had not yet built. Elena sat 2 rows ahead, taking notes in a leather-bound notebook, her handwriting neat and slanted. When Adrian finally stood to ask a question, he phrased it like a challenge. The room laughed, the speaker smiled, Elena turned around. "Not impressed. Interested." After the lecture, while Adrian waited near the exit with his pitch deck under one arm, she approached him and said, "Your question was clever, but your numbers are wrong." He stared at her. Most people complimented him first. Elena corrected him. "What numbers?" he asked. "Your assumed growth rate, your customer acquisition cost, your margin after year 3, she held up her notebook. "You're selling confidence, not a business." "I suppose you have a better model." "I do." She did. They spent the next 4 hours in a campus cafe while rain striped the windows. Adrian talked like a man trying to outrun his own childhood. Elena listened like someone who could hear what he was hiding beneath every boast. He told her he came from Queens, that his father drove trucks until his back failed, that his mother cleaned offices at night. He told her he hated the smell of cheap coffee and hospital disinfectant because it reminded him of bills. He did not tell her how many times he had watched his parents choose which envelope not to open. He did not tell her that poverty had entered him like a vow. Never again. Elena told him less, that her father was dead, that her mother had taught her 3 languages and the value of silence, that she wanted to build companies that did not devour people to grow. Adrian had laughed at that. Companies are not churches. No, Elena said, but they don't have to be wolves either. He should have heard the warning in that. He should have known then that Elena's softness had edges. Instead, he saw what ambitious men often see when kindness appears before them. Usefulness. Within 6 months, Elena had rebuilt his model, rewritten his pitch, introduced him to 2 angel investors through family friends, and stayed up nights beside him in that cracked window office, eating noodles from paper cartons while he promised that when he made it, she would never have to worry again. She did not ask for diamonds then, she asked for equity. He laughed and kissed her forehead. Of course, he said, you and me, partners. But when the documents were drafted, her name was not there. He told her it was temporary, cleaner for investors, simpler for governance, better optics. She believed him because love often mistakes explanations for truth when they come from the mouth it trusts most. Years later, on the night before their wedding, Elena's mother, Camille, fastened a pearl bracelet around her wrist and said, "A man who asks you to shrink before marriage will ask you to disappear after it." Elena had smiled nervously. Adrian loves me. Camille looked at her daughter's reflection in the mirror. I hope he loves you more than he loves becoming Adrian Blackwood. At the time, Elena thought the warning was bitterness. Her mother had lost a husband young and inherited a corporate war she never wanted. Vos Meridian, the old family company, had survived because Camille fought quietly while louder men underestimated her. Elena had grown up watching men enter rooms assuming Camille was ornamental, only to leave without realizing she had already taken the sharpest pieces off the board. Silence is not weakness, Camille used to say, sometimes it is a vault. Elena did not understand how much her mother had prepared her until the day Adrian's lawyers tried to make her look empty. The divorce had not begun with shouting. It began with Adrian coming home at midnight and placing a folder on the dining table. He had not even removed his coat. Elena was 4 months pregnant then, though she had started wearing loose sweaters because she could not bear the way his eyes avoided her stomach. She had made soup that evening, not because she thought soup could save a marriage, but because grief makes people repeat small rituals from happier days. Adrian did not sit. My attorney will contact yours in the morning, he said. She looked at the folder. What is this? A clean separation agreement. The word clean made her want to laugh. There was nothing clean about the way he had been sleeping in another wing of the house, nothing clean about the clinic brochures he left where she would find them, nothing clean about the silence he used as punishment. I'm your wife, she said. You're making choices that affect my company. Our child affects your company. His jaw tightened. You keep saying our child as if repeating it changes the facts. What facts? That you are trying to force a life on me that I did not agree to. Elena stood slowly. You agreed when you married me. I agreed to a partnership. You removed me from the company. This is not about that. It has always been about that. He looked tired then, but not sad. Tired of inconvenience. Tired of resistance. Tired of the woman who had once helped build his dream, now asking him to share responsibility for the human consequence of their life together. Sign it, he said. I'll make sure you're comfortable. Comfortable. The same word men used for pets, mistresses, and retired employees. Elena looked at the folder and remembered something strange from years earlier, a night in the old office when their first investor check arrived. Adrian had been so excited he lifted her off the floor and spun her around. On the desk, beneath the check, lay her revised financial model with her initials in the footer. EV. He had kissed her then and whispered, "One day they'll know what we built." They never did. The world learned only his name. Elena did not sign the agreement that night. So Adrian went to war. He hired Marcus Vale, a man with white hair, polished manners, and the moral temperature of marble. They framed Elena as unstable. They suggested she had married Adrian for money. They produced photographs of her crying outside a clinic and twisted them into proof of emotional volatility. They subpoenaed messages, selected fragments, built a portrait of a desperate woman clinging to a powerful man. Adrian watched it happen. That was what Elena never forgot. Not Marcus's questions, not the headlines, not the whispers from women who used to kiss her cheeks at galas and now lowered their voices when she passed. Adrian watching. At one point, Marcus asked, "Mrs. Blackwood, is it true you refused reasonable medical counsel, and then attempted to use your pregnancy to influence Mr. Blackwood's business decisions?" The courtroom went silent. Elena looked at Adrian. He looked down at his cufflinks. The cufflinks were gold, engraved with the initials AB. She had bought them for him after his first $100 million acquisition. That memory did something to her heart, not broke it. The breaking had already happened. This was different. Something within her cooled and became precise. When it was over, Adrian kept the houses, the company, the accounts, the art, the cars, the reputation. Elena kept her mother's pearl bracelet, 2 suitcases, a sealed envelope from her father's estate, and the child he insisted would ruin him. That sealed envelope had waited in a safety deposit box for years. Her father, Laurent Voss, had left it with instructions that she receive it only under one of 3 conditions: Camille's death, Elena's 35th birthday, or legal separation from a spouse who had gained financial benefit from her labor without documented compensation. Laurent had been a gentle man with a ruthless understanding of contracts. He adored his daughter, but he did not trust the world to adore her fairly. Before he died, he built protections into trusts, voting shares, and dormant ownership structures, all hidden beneath layers of legal patience. Elena opened the envelope in a small apartment above a bakery in Brooklyn, while rain tapped at the fire escape. Inside was a letter in her father's handwriting. "My dearest Elena, if you are reading this because someone has made you feel powerless, forgive me for not being there to stand beside you. But know this, power is not always loud. Sometimes it waits until you are ready to carry it. There are papers enclosed that Camille will explain if she has not already. Voss Meridian belongs to our family, but one day it must belong to someone who remembers that people are not numbers. I believed that person would be you. Do not seek revenge in anger. Anger spends too quickly. Seek truth. Truth compounds." Elena read the letter once. Then again. Then she rested both hands over her stomach and cried so quietly that the neighbors never heard. By morning, she called her mother. Camille did not sound surprised. "I wondered when he would become foolish enough to force your hand," she said. "You knew." "I knew the trust terms. I also knew you loved him too much to use them unless he left you no choice. I don't want to become cruel." "Then don't," Camille said. "Become exact." Exact. That word became the architecture of the next 8 months. While Adrian gave interviews about resilience and innovation, Elena moved through back rooms, legal offices, private family archives, and board meetings where elderly directors first looked at her stomach, then her face, then the voting documents that made her impossible to dismiss. Some underestimated her politely. That was their first mistake. Some assumed pregnancy made her temporary. That was their second. Some asked whether her husband would advise her. Camille laughed so sharply, the room went still. My daughter is here because her husband forgot who advised him. Voss Meridian was not flashy like Blackwood Global. It did not plaster its name across stadiums or host champagne-soaked investor weekends. It owned ports, medical technology patents, rare earth logistics routes, data infrastructure, biotech campuses, and controlling positions in companies Adrian had only read about in confidential briefings. It had survived wars, recessions, hostile takeovers, and arrogant men with expensive pens. And now Elena chaired it. Quietly. She did not announce herself. She did not post statements. She did not grant interviews. She signed as E. Voss, appeared in meetings by audio, and allowed the business press to speculate that the mysterious new chairwoman was an elderly widow, a Swiss financier, or a committee of lawyers. Adrian never imagined her. That was his final and fatal arrogance. The $10 billion deal came to Voss Meridian through desperation dressed as ambition. Blackwood Global needed liquidity. Its expansion had been reckless. Adrian had borrowed against projected revenue, moved money through subsidiaries, inflated asset values, and promised the same future profits to different lenders. For years, momentum concealed the rot. As long as deals kept closing, no one opened the walls. But interest rates rose. One acquisition underperformed. A shipping disruption delayed payments. A whistleblower from Blackwood's Dubai office sent an anonymous packet to a regulator, and suddenly Adrian needed a rescue disguised as a partnership. Voss Meridian was the perfect savior. Its data infrastructure division needed logistics capacity. Blackwood Global needed cash, legitimacy, and time. The deal would merge shipping routes, AI-driven freight systems, and medical supply chains across 5 continents. $10 billion. Enough to stabilize Blackwood, silence rumors, and crown Adrian as the genius who survived the storm. He never asked why Voss Meridian moved so quickly. He never asked why their due diligence team requested old internal models dating back to Blackwood's founding. He never asked why one analyst kept returning to documents with the initials EV hidden in the metadata. Elena asked all those questions. She sat late into the night in her office overlooking the river, reading files that felt like autopsies of her own marriage. There were her projections, renamed under Adrian's leadership team. Her acquisition strategy, credited to a senior executive who once called her Adrian's pretty conscience at a holiday party. Her risk warnings, ignored and then deleted. Her emails, forwarded without attribution. Then there were darker things. Shell companies. Political payments disguised as consulting fees. Offshore accounts used to hide losses. Loans secured by assets Blackwood did not fully own. And one private transfer that made Elena sit back in her chair, suddenly cold. 6 years earlier, during Blackwood's first major expansion, Adrian had used a bridge loan from a Voss family-connected fund. Elena had arranged the introduction. The loan terms had included a clause: any misrepresentation of collateral would trigger immediate review and potential asset seizure. Adrian had lied on the collateral. Not slightly, not accidentally. He had pledged assets already encumbered elsewhere, then buried the conflict beneath subsidiaries with names so bland they seemed designed to cure insomnia. The clause had slept for 6 years. Like a seed under stone. Elena placed one hand on her stomach and whispered, he really thought everything could be buried. The baby kicked for the first time that night. Not a flutter, a small, undeniable movement. Elena froze, then laughed through sudden tears. For months, she had been living among lawyers, ledgers, and ghosts. That tiny motion reminded her that the future was not a courtroom, not a boardroom, not Adrian's shadow. It was alive. She named the feeling before she named the child. Prove. From that night forward, she stopped thinking of revenge as destruction. She thought of it as return. Returning stolen credit. Returning hidden debt. Returning consequences to the man who had spent his life mailing them elsewhere. There were moments when she almost warned him. That was the part no one would have believed. 3 times, Elena instructed Voss Meridian's legal team to send Blackwood Global requests for voluntary disclosure before the signing. 3 times, Adrian's office responded with polished arrogance. Once, his CFO asked whether Voss Meridian's chairwoman was getting nervous. Adrian personally wrote a note in the margin of one draft response before it was scanned back. "We are not in the habit of being audited by people who need us." Elena stared at that sentence for a long time. Then she had it printed and placed in the folder. The folder became famous later. Though no photograph of its contents ever leaked, journalists called it the Black Folder as if it was some mysterious weapon. In truth, it was dark green leather, old and soft, from her father's office. Laurent Voss had used it to carry contracts when Elena was a child. She remembered sitting beneath his desk, playing with paper clips, while he told her, "Never sign anything you cannot survive." On the morning of the boardroom meeting, Elena chose that folder deliberately. Her mother watched from the doorway as she prepared. Camille was older now, her silver hair swept back, her posture still regal enough to make expensive rooms behave. She watched Elena fasten the pearl bracelet, the same one from the wedding night. "You don't have to be in the room," Camille said. "Yes, I do. It will hurt. It already hurt." Camille's eyes softened, and the baby. Elena touched her stomach. She deserves to inherit truth, not fear. "She." Elena smiled faintly. "I think so." Camille walked closer and adjusted the bracelet clasp. "Then let her first lesson be this: mercy is not the same as surrender." At Voss Meridian Tower, the lobby ceiling rose 7 stories above Italian stone floors. Rain slid down the glass walls in silver sheets. Elena entered through the private side entrance, but she paused before stepping into the elevator. Across the lobby hung an enormous abstract sculpture of black steel and clear glass. Years earlier, Adrian had mocked it at a gala. "Looks like a cage pretending to be art," he had said. Elena had answered, "Maybe it's a door pretending to be a cage." He had rolled his eyes. Now, as the elevator carried her upward, she wondered how many doors he had mistaken for walls simply because they did not open for him. On the 48th floor, Adrian was already performing. She saw him through the glass before he saw her. He stood at the head of the conference table, smiling, one hand in his pocket, the other gesturing toward projected numbers he no longer deserved to speak aloud. His hair was perfect. His suit was perfect. His confidence filled the room like expensive smoke. For a second, the past overlapped the present. Adrian in the old office, sleeves rolled up, eyes bright, promising they would change everything. Adrian in their bedroom, turning away when she reached for him. Adrian in court, looking down at his cufflinks. Then the boardroom doors opened. Every executive stood. Adrian did not. His face changed in stages. Confusion first, then irritation, then recognition, then something rawer. Fear. Elena had wondered whether seeing him afraid would satisfy her. It did not. It only confirmed how small he had always been beneath the size of his ambition. "Good morning," she said, taking her seat at the opposite end of the table. No one spoke. Adrian's lips parted. "Elena." Around the table, heads turned slightly, not enough to be rude, enough to understand there was a story in the room no contract had disclosed. Elena opened the green folder. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, and watched the title strike him harder than his name would have. Before Voss Meridian can proceed with any partnership, there are material inconsistencies that require clarification. His gaze darted to the lawyers, to his CFO, to the gold-trimmed documents waiting for signatures. "Elena, this is not. This is a board meeting," she said, and you will address the board. The silence after that was absolute. She did not list everything at once. That would have been anger. Elena had learned patience from grief. She began with the inflated valuation of 3 subsidiaries, then the hidden debt, then the collateral conflict, then the unauthorized transfers, then the internal emails showing knowledge and intent. With each page, Adrian lost another shade of color. His CFO began sweating first, then whispering urgently to counsel, then refusing to answer without representation. One of Blackwood's outside directors pushed back his chair and said he had never seen these documents. Another asked whether the meeting was being recorded. It was. Adrian tried charm. Elena, we have personal history. I understand you're upset, but this is bigger than us. She turned one page. You are correct. This is bigger than us. He tried outrage. You cannot sabotage a $10 billion international agreement because of a divorce. She turned another page. No, but I can terminate negotiations because your company is built on fraudulent disclosures. He tried softness then, and that disgusted her most. Elena, he said quietly, leaning forward as if they were alone, please, you don't want to do this. For a moment she saw the kitchen again, the pregnancy test, his face hardening, his voice saying be practical. I gave you opportunities to disclose, she said. You declined. I didn't know it was you. There it was. The sentence that revealed everything. Not I would have told the truth. Not I would have made it right. I didn't know it was you. Meaning he would have behaved better only if he knew the person across from him had power. Elena closed the folder. That has always been your problem, Adrian. You only recognize people when they can cost you something. By sunset, Voss Meridian's withdrawal triggered contractual reporting obligations. By evening, regulators had opened formal inquiries. By night, lenders invoked default clauses. By midnight, Blackwood Global's emergency board meeting ended with Adrian removed as chief executive pending investigation. The empire did not explode. It folded. That was the part Adrian could not understand. He had imagined disaster as noise, shouting traders, flashing cameras, enemies pounding at the gates. But real collapse came through emails, clauses, signatures, locked accounts, polite voices saying unfortunately, pending review, no longer available, terminated effective immediately. At 1:17 a.m., his personal banker stopped answering. At 2:03 a.m., his company card declined at a private lounge. At 3:26 a.m., a board member he had made rich texted, I'm sorry, Adrian, but we all have families. Adrian stared at that message with a bitterness so intense it made his teeth ache. Families. The word followed him into dawn. He found himself outside the hospital again 2 days later. Not because he planned it, he told himself. He had simply walked too far, too long, without knowing where to go. But the truth was uglier. He wanted to see her. He wanted proof that the pregnant woman in the rain had been real. He wanted to look at her stomach again and calculate how much time he had lost, how much control might still be possible. The hospital entrance was quieter in daylight. Nurses changed shifts. A man carried flowers wrapped in brown paper. A young couple stood under the awning laughing nervously over a sonogram photo. Adrian looked away. Then he saw Elena's driver. Not the old Blackwood driver, a Voss Meridian security driver in a dark coat, standing beside a silver car with diplomatic plates. Adrian moved before thinking. Elena. The driver stepped into his path. Adrian tried to go around him. I need to speak to my wife. Ms. Voss is unavailable. Ms. Voss. Not Mrs. Blackwood. The name hit him with unexpected force. She's carrying my child. The driver's expression did not change. You may contact her attorney. Her attorney, Adrian almost laughed. I'm the father. A woman's voice behind him said, Biology is not a backstage pass, Adrian. He turned. Elena stood a few feet away, wrapped in a long charcoal coat, one hand resting lightly over her stomach. She looked tired, but not weak. There were shadows beneath her eyes and rain pearls in her hair. She was more beautiful than he remembered, not because she had changed, but because he was finally seeing the parts of her he had trained himself to ignore. "Elena," he said. She did not move closer. For the first time since the divorce, there were no lawyers, no executives, no documents between them. Only wet pavement and the child he had tried to erase. "I saw you," he said. "I know. You didn't do it." Her face remained still. "No." He swallowed. "Why didn't you tell me?" Something flashed in her eyes then, quick and bright. "I did." "No, you didn't. I told you I was pregnant. I told you I was keeping the baby. I told you this child mattered. You chose not to hear anything that inconvenienced you." He looked down. His shoes were ruined from rain. He hated noticing that. Hated that even now some small, spoiled part of him could care about leather. "I was under pressure. So was I. I made mistakes. You made decisions." He breathed in sharply. "You destroyed me." "No," Elena said. "I stopped protecting you from what you built. You could have warned me." "I did, through legal disclosure requests, through compliance notices. Through every chance, your arrogance returned unsigned. You know that's not what I mean." "Yes," she said. "You mean I could have warned you as your ex-wife, quietly, privately, lovingly, the way I once fixed your numbers, polished your speeches, softened your cruelty, and stood beside you while you took credit for surviving storms I carried you through." The truth of it left him silent. A taxi honked behind them. Somewhere above, a hospital window opened, then closed. Adrian's voice lowered. "Is it a boy or a girl?" Elena's hand tightened slightly over her stomach. "That is not yours to ask like this." Pain crossed his face, but Elena knew him too well to mistake pain for transformation. Adrian had always been most convincing when he had something to lose. "I have a right to know. You have a right to pursue legal channels after birth. You do not have the right to ambush me outside a hospital and call it concern." "Elena, please." The word sounded strange from him. "Please." He had used it before with investors, judges, donors, board chairs, always with calculation, never like a man standing in the wreckage of himself. For one dangerous second, Elena remembered the young man in the cafe, the one with too much hunger and not enough tenderness, the one who had looked at her financial model and said, "You're brilliant," before he learned to make her brilliance invisible. There had been good moments. That was what made betrayal cruel. Monsters who are monsters from the beginning are easy to flee. Adrian had laughed with her on fire escapes, held her mother's hand at Lawrence Memorial, slept on the floor beside her when fever kept her awake one winter. He had once walked 6 blocks in a snowstorm to buy the specific tea she wanted. But kindness given occasionally does not cancel harm practiced consistently. Elena stepped back. "My daughter will not learn love from a man who confuses possession with care." "Daughter." The word escaped before she could stop it. Adrian heard it. His face changed again, not with joy, but with stunned ownership, as if a door had opened in a house he had burned. "A daughter," he whispered. Elena immediately regretted giving him that much, not because the child was a secret, but because Adrian could turn any information into leverage. The driver opened the car door. "Elena, wait," Adrian said. "I can change." She looked at him over her shoulder. "Then change, but do not mistake change for a receipt you can bring to me for repayment." The car pulled away, leaving him on the curb. That night, Adrian slept in a business hotel under a false sense of temporary defeat. He used a backup credit card connected to an overseas account he thought investigators had not found. By morning, they found it. The room phone rang at 7:12 a.m. Mr. Blackwood, the front desk said, there appears to be an issue with payment. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the city through grey curtains. Of course there was. The next week stripped him without drama. His assets went first, then his memberships, then the houses in Aspen and Southampton. The private jet belonged to a holding company now under review. The art collection was pledged against a loan. His watch collection was seized pending creditor claims. The townhouse, the last symbol, remained locked behind court order. News vans camped outside buildings he could no longer enter. Former friends became careful strangers. One evening, Adrian saw a clip of himself on television in a diner where he had gone because it accepted cash. The pundit on screen called him a cautionary tale of unchecked executive ego. The waitress refilled his coffee without recognizing him. He almost missed being hated. Being unknown was worse. Across town, Elena watched the same coverage without satisfaction. Her office lights reflected in the windows. Below, the river moved black and steady. On her desk lay two piles, one for Blackwood Global's legal fallout, one for Voss Meridian's expansion into medical supply infrastructure. She signed the second pile first. Camille sat on the sofa nearby, knitting a tiny white blanket with the ruthless focus she brought to shareholder disputes. You look disappointed, Camille said. I thought justice would feel cleaner. It rarely does. I don't want my daughter born into the middle of a war. Then end your part in it. Elena looked over, and Adrian. Adrian is not a war, he is a consequence. That distinction stayed with her. In the months that followed, Elena prepared for motherhood and leadership with equal seriousness. She attended prenatal appointments with Camille or alone. She chaired meetings with a glass of ginger tea beside her. She approved an internal ethics overhaul at Voss Meridian and created a founder's credit review that restored archived contribution records, including her own to Blackwood's early history once the company entered restructuring. Her name appeared in a financial journal for the first time not as Adrian Blackwood's ex-wife, but as Elena Voss, chairwoman of Voss Meridian Holdings. The article mentioned that early Blackwood global growth models appeared to have been influenced by her work. Influenced. Elena smiled at the timid word. The world was still learning how to say stolen. Adrian saw the article in a public library. He had gone there because it was warm and free. His beard had grown in unevenly. His suits had been replaced by cheaper clothes bought with cash after he sold the last watch he had managed to keep. His attorneys were court-appointed now for some matters, hostile for others. Marcus Vale had turned witness fast enough to prove that loyalty, like luxury, has a market price. The library smelled of dust and old paper. Adrian sat at a computer between a student writing an essay and an elderly man watching travel videos with headphones. He read Elena's profile 3 times. There was a photograph of her at a conference, visibly pregnant behind a podium, speaking about ethical infrastructure and accountability. The caption called her one of the most powerful private sector leaders in the world. Adrian leaned back, dizzy. For years he had thought power meant being seen, rooms standing, cameras flashing, men laughing at jokes that were not funny. Elena had become powerful while hidden. That offended him before it humbled him. How dare she rise without him? The thought appeared automatically, ugly and honest. He hated himself for it, then hated her, then hated the library chair, the old computer, the fluorescent lights, the student beside him tapping too loudly on the keyboard. But beneath all that hatred lay a question he could not silence. What if she had always been this powerful, and he had been too greedy to notice? He remembered their first pitch meeting with Bankrupt Capital. Adrian had been nervous that day, though he would have died before admitting it. His palms sweated through his notes. The investors were older, sharper, bored. Halfway through, one asked a question about failure scenarios that Adrian could not answer. Elena answered. Not loudly, not dramatically. She simply leaned forward and explained the risk corridor, the mitigation plan, the customer retention model, and the emergency liquidity structure she had designed. The room changed. Adrian had felt it, respect moving toward her. So he interrupted. As Elena was saying, our team has built a robust plan. Our team. Later, when the check came, he celebrated as if the victory were his alone. Elena did not correct him. She rarely did in public. He told himself that meant she did not mind. Now, years later, sitting in a library with nowhere to go, he understood something humiliating. Her silence had not been agreement. It had been evidence. A month before Elena's due date, Adrian filed a petition. His attorney advised against making aggressive claims, given the divorce record and ongoing investigations. Adrian insisted. The petition requested acknowledgement of paternity, future visitation rights, and access to medical information. Elena's legal team responded within 48 hours. The response was formal, restrained, and devastating. Ms. Voss does not contest Mr. Blackwood's right to establish paternity through proper legal procedure after the child's birth. However, given Mr. Blackwood's documented attempts to pressure Ms. Voss regarding the pregnancy, his public and private conduct during the divorce, and current legal instability, all contact must proceed through counsel. Adrian threw the papers across his temporary room. Temporary was generous. It was a rented basement studio in Jersey City with a radiator that clanked at night and a window facing a brick wall. The landlord required cash. Adrian told himself it was strategic, discreet, temporary. Everything was temporary until it became his life. He started writing Elena emails he never sent. Some were angry. You had no right to do this. Some were pleading. I know I failed you, but I deserve a chance. Some were almost honest. I don't know who I am without everyone believing in me. He deleted that one immediately. Honesty felt like standing naked in a room full of creditors. The baby was born during a thunderstorm. Adrian found out from the news, which was perhaps cruel, perhaps inevitable. Voss Meridian released a brief statement congratulating Chairwoman Elena Voss on the birth of her daughter, both healthy and resting privately. No name. No photograph. No invitation. Adrian sat on the edge of his narrow bed while rain knocked against the small window. A daughter, born into a world where he had no house to bring her to, no company to leave her, no name clean enough to offer without explanation. He expected rage to come first. Instead came memory. His own father standing in a tiny apartment kitchen, counting bills under yellow light. Adrian had been 12, pretending to do homework. His father thought he was asleep when he whispered to Adrian's mother, I don't know how to give him more. His mother had answered, then give him what you can without turning cruel. Adrian had spent his life remembering the first half. I don't know how to give him more. He had forgotten the second. Without turning cruel. In the weeks after the birth, Adrian began walking past Voss Meridian Tower at odd hours. He told himself he was not stalking, he was waiting for the right moment. A chance, a sign, a glimpse. Once he saw Camille leaving with a baby carrier shielded beneath a white blanket. Security moved around her with discreet efficiency. Adrian stepped forward, then stopped. He was not afraid of the guards. He was afraid of the blanket. Afraid that the child beneath it would have Elena's eyes and his chin. Afraid he would feel nothing. More afraid he would feel something. Camille saw him. She did not look surprised. She handed the carrier to the driver, said something softly, then walked toward him beneath a black umbrella. Adrian stood frozen. Mrs. Voss, he said. Do not perform manners with me, Adrian. I knew you when your shoes had holes. His face burned. Camille's gaze moved over him, not cruelly, but thoroughly. She saw the cheap coat, the unshaven jaw, the exhaustion he had stopped being able to disguise. "She's healthy," Camille said. His throat tightened. "Elena. The baby. Those." Camille's expression hardened. "You may ask about my daughter too. She nearly carried your empire before she carried your child." "I want to see them." "No," Camille said. The word was quiet, but it closed the air. "I'm her father." "You are her biological father. Whether you become anything more depends on whether you learn the difference between wanting access and earning trust." "I lost everything." Camille tilted her head. "No, you lost the things you counted. That is not the same as everything." "You think I deserved this?" "I think you are meeting the architecture of your own choices." He looked past her toward the car. The baby carrier was already inside, hidden. "What is her name?" Camille studied him for a long moment. "Elena will tell you when she chooses." "She hates me that much." "No," Camille said, "that is what should frighten you. Hatred would keep you important. She is building a life in which you are no longer the center of the wound." Then she returned to the car and left him standing beneath the awning as the storm softened to mist. Adrian did not follow. Something in him was tired of chasing doors he had slammed himself. The bankruptcy proceedings became public theater. Reporters loved the fall, the billionaire without billions, the genius whose genius had footnotes, the man who preached discipline while hiding chaos in shell companies. Adrian appeared in courtrooms where no one feared him anymore. He sat while accountants dismantled his life line by line. "This transfer," one examiner said, pointing to a screen, "was authorized by you." Adrian looked at the date. It was the day after Elena told him she was pregnant. He remembered that transfer. He had moved funds to secure political support for a regulatory approval he feared might fail if his personal life became messy. He had told himself it was necessary. Everything had been necessary then. Every lie, every pressure, every betrayal. Necessary. The word looked pathetic under fluorescent court lights. "Yes," he said. His lawyer stiffened beside him. It was the first time Adrian had answered without trying to reshape the truth. "Yes," he repeated, "I authorized it." That admission did not save him. It did not redeem him. It did not open Elena's door or soften the headlines. The law continued its work. Creditors continued theirs. Blackwood Global was broken apart, its viable divisions sold, its toxic parts buried under legal supervision. Voss Meridian acquired one division at a discount, the medical logistics system Elena had originally designed years earlier. The press called it ruthless. Elena called it recovery. She kept the employees, fired the executives who knew about the fraud, restored delayed pensions, rebranded the division under a new name, Meridian Lifeline. In the first staff meeting, an older engineer approached her afterward with watery eyes. "Mrs. Blackwood," he began. Elena gently corrected him, "Ms. Voss." "Ms. Voss," he said, "I worked on the original model. We all knew it was yours." She was not prepared for how much that sentence would hurt. Or heal. That night, she returned home to her daughter. The baby's name was Amara Laurent Voss. Amara meaning grace. Laurent for the grandfather who had built vaults of protection his daughter would one day need. Voss because Elena refused to give her child a name that came with unpaid debts of the soul. Amara slept in a bassinet beside the window, tiny fists curled, mouth opening and closing around dreams. Elena watched her for a long time. The city glittered beyond the glass, indifferent and endless. "You will know the truth one day," Elena whispered, "but not as a burden, as a map." She did not want Amara to inherit bitterness. That became Elena's private discipline. It would have been easy to make Adrian a monster in every telling, to flatten him into a villain and herself into a survivor without flaws. But Elena knew life was more dangerous than that. Adrian had not been born cruel. He had become cruel by feeding fear until it wore ambition's clothing. She would teach Amara to recognize that. She would teach her that love without respect is hunger. That apology without accountability is theater. That power without conscience eventually eats its owner. 3 months after Amara's birth, Adrian came to Voss Meridian Tower asking for Elena without an appointment. Security called upstairs. Elena almost refused. She was in the middle of reviewing expansion plans for a hospital supply network in West Africa. Amara's photo sat beside her monitor, one tiny hand gripping Camille's finger. Elena had not seen Adrian in person since outside the hospital. She had seen him in headlines, in legal filings, in grainy photographs outside courthouses. He looked smaller in all of them. Not physically, something else. The distance between who he had pretended to be and who remained had narrowed enough that the costume no longer fit. Her assistant waited by the door. "Shall I tell security to escort him out?" Elena looked at the green folder on her shelf. It rested there now empty, not as a weapon, but as a reminder. "No," she said. "Bring him to Conference Room C. Keep security outside." Conference Room C was not the boardroom where she ended his empire. That was intentional. She would not repeat theater for his benefit. Adrian entered 10 minutes later. He wore a dark coat, clean but worn at the cuffs. His hair was shorter. There were lines at the corners of his mouth she did not remember. He looked around the room as if expecting cameras, lawyers, witnesses. There were none. Only Elena, seated at the table with a glass of water before her. He remained standing. "Thank you for seeing me." She gestured to the chair. He sat. For a moment neither spoke. Outside, snow began to fall lightly, softening the city's hard edges. Elena remembered another snowfall years ago, Adrian arriving home with tea, grinning because his eyelashes were dusted white. The memory passed through her like a ghost she no longer needed to invite in. "I saw the name in a filing," Adrian said. "Amara." Elena's face cooled. "It was sealed. My attorney received confirmation through the paternity process. I didn't leak anything." "I know, if you had, this meeting would already be over." He nodded. "Amara Laurent Voss." "Yes. She has your father's name. She has many things from my father. And from me." Elena looked at him carefully. The question held the old Adrian inside it. The need to claim, to locate himself in another person, to turn even a baby into proof of legacy. "She has your eyes," Elena said finally. The answer struck him. He looked down at his hands. "I don't deserve to see her," he said. Elena did not comfort him. "No," she said, "you don't." He flinched, but he did not argue. "I thought losing everything would make me angry enough to fight back," he said after a while. "For a while it did. I blamed you. I blamed Marcus. The board, the market, my father, poverty, everyone." He swallowed. "Then one day I was sitting in court, listening to an accountant read my decisions like weather reports, and I realized no one had forced my hand. Not once. They tempted me. They praised me. They looked away. But I signed." Elena listened. The old version of her might have leaned toward him then, eager to reward confession with warmth. She knew that instinct well. It had kept her trapped for years, mistaking his rare self-awareness for permanent change. Now she waited. Adrian reached into his coat and removed a folded letter. Security shifted outside the glass. Elena glanced at the paper, but did not take it. "It's not for you," he said quickly. "It's for Amara, not now, someday if you decide." "What does it say?" "That I was wrong before she was born, that I was afraid and selfish and cruel, that she owes me nothing, that if I ever become worthy of knowing her, it will be because of what I do, not because of what I am." Elena's throat tightened despite herself. She hated that, hated how grief could still find a soft place beneath all her armor. "Words are easy, Adrian. I know. Do you?" I'm learning. He pushed the letter gently across the table, stopping halfway, not close enough to force her hand. That restraint was new. Or performed. Elena could not yet know which. Why are you here? She asked. He looked up. I wanted to ask to see my daughter. There it was. The sentence the hook had promised, the plea he had carried through rain, courtrooms, cheap rooms, and ruined pride. Elena's face did not change. But I know, he continued, voice rough, that asking is not the same as deserving, so I'm also here to tell you I won't fight dirty. I won't leak her name. I won't use court filings to hurt you. I won't pretend this is about fatherhood if it's really about control. Snow gathered against the window. Elena thought of the night he placed divorce papers on the dining table, how easily he had turned law into punishment, how casually he had used reputation as a blade. The man across from her had the same face as that man, but not the same posture. His shoulders had learned gravity. Still, gravity was not goodness. What are you asking for exactly? She said. A path. To what? To earning the chance to know her. Elena stood and walked to the window. Below, people moved through the snow like dark marks on white paper. The city had watched her humiliated and praised him, then watched him fall and praised her. Cities loved reversals more than justice. She turned back. My answer is not yes. His jaw tightened. But it is not never, she said. Hope flashed in his eyes, dangerous and hungry. She lifted a hand. Do not mistake that for forgiveness. I won't. You will complete the parenting accountability program recommended by the court. You will comply with every financial disclosure. You will make restitution where ordered. You will communicate only through the family liaison until a judge says otherwise. You will not come to my office, my home, or Amara's medical appointments uninvited. You will not speak to the press about her. You will not use her to repair your image. I understand. I'm not finished. He closed his mouth. If after that professionals, not you, not me, determine that contact is in Amara's best interest, it will begin supervised. Briefly, quietly. She will never be handed to you as a prize for suffering consequences. Adrian stared at her. Once that would have enraged him. He would have called it controlling, vindictive, cruel. He would have accused her of poisoning his child against him before the child could speak. Now he only nodded. Thank you, he said. Elena's eyes sharpened. Do not thank me. Thank your daughter one day by becoming someone who does not make her responsible for your redemption. That was the final answer that shattered what remained of his pride. Not because it denied him. Because it gave him no villain to hide behind. He had come prepared, somewhere deep inside, to be refused completely. A total refusal would let him hate Elena cleanly. It would let him tell himself she was bitter, heartless, using the child as revenge. But this was worse. She had given him a door. Narrow, guarded, difficult, entirely dependent on his actions. A door he could not open with money, charm, threats, or history. Only with change. He looked at the letter on the table. Will you read it? I will decide when I am ready. He nodded again, stood, and walked toward the door. Elena, he said, stopping. She waited. I did love you. The words entered the room softly. For years she had wanted to hear them, during the lonely dinners, during the pregnancy arguments, during the divorce, during the nights above the bakery when the baby moved inside her and Elena wondered how a man could help create life and call it inconvenience. Now the words arrived late, carrying no power to repair what they named. I know, she said. His face twisted with pain. That was perhaps the cruelest mercy she could have offered, not denial, not mockery, recognition. He had loved her, just not enough to honor her, just not more than he feared being powerless, just not in a way that protected her from him. After he left, Elena remained in the conference room until the snow thickened. The letter sat on the table. She did not touch it for a long time. When she finally picked it up, her hands did not tremble. That evening she went home to Amara. Camille was in the nursery, humming an old French lullaby while the baby watched the mobile turn above her crib. Tiny glass stars caught the light and scattered it across the walls. Elena stood in the doorway. Camille glanced back. How was he? Less certain. That is a beginning. Maybe. Elena approached the crib. Amara blinked up at her with Adrian's eyes, dark and searching, set in Elena's face. The sight still startled her sometimes. Biology was complicated like that. It could preserve traces of people you had survived. Camille touched Elena's shoulder. Did you get what you were owed? She asked quietly. Elena looked around the room. The child safe in her crib, the company restored to ethical ground, the stolen work returned to her name, the silence broken without becoming noise. She thought of Adrian in the rain outside his locked mansion. She thought of herself in court, watching him look down at his cufflinks. She thought of the folder, her father's letter, the baby's first kick, the boardroom standing. For a long time, she had believed what she was owed was repayment. Then she thought it was revenge. Now she understood it was something harder to win and easier to lose. Please, I'm collecting it, Elena said. Not all at once. Not through headlines. Not through Adrian's ruin. But each morning Amara woke healthy. Each time Elena signed her own name. Each time a room listened when she spoke. Each time she remembered the past without returning to it. Months passed. Adrian completed the first program, then the second. He took work consulting for a small non-profit that helped rebuild businesses after financial misconduct, a job no one envied and few respected. He lived in a modest apartment with second-hand furniture and a kettle that whistled too loudly. He still had debts, still had court dates, still had mornings when shame sat on his chest before he opened his eyes. But he stopped giving interviews, stopped trying to correct every article, stopped calling consequences betrayal. Once he passed a luxury watch store and paused before the window. His reflection stared back between rows of polished gold. He remembered a night years earlier when Elena had said, "One day you'll have everything you want, and I'm afraid you still won't know what you need." At the time, he had told her need was a word used by people who lacked discipline. Now he turned away from the watches and kept walking. The first supervised visit happened on a bright spring morning in a family center with pale yellow walls and toys arranged in clean baskets. Adrian arrived 20 minutes early wearing a plain blue sweater. His hands would not stop moving. A specialist greeted him and explained the rules. Then the door opened. Elena entered, carrying Amara. The baby was 6 months old, round-cheeked and solemn. Wearing a soft white cardigan, Adrian stood too fast, then caught himself. Elena noticed. So did the specialist. "Hello, Adrian," Elena said. His eyes were fixed on the baby. "Hello." Elena did not hand Amara over immediately. She sat first, let the baby adjust, spoke softly in her ear. Adrian watched with an ache so deep it made him almost grateful no one had trusted him with this moment before he was ready to understand its weight. Finally, Elena looked at the specialist, then at him. "You can sit there," she said. He sat on the rug. Elena lowered Amara onto a blanket a few feet away. The baby studied him with wide, dark eyes. Adrian's throat closed. For once, he did not reach. He waited. Amara waved one tiny fist, unimpressed by bankruptcies, scandals, empires, or men who had mistaken themselves for gods. Adrian smiled, and it broke something open in his face. "Hello, Amara," he whispered. "I'm Adrian." "Not Daddy." "Not yet." Elena heard the restraint and looked down. Outside, sunlight touched the windows. No rain, no cameras, no boardroom, no gold-trimmed documents. Just a child, a mother, and a fallen man learning that some doors open only for those willing to kneel without demanding applause. Alina did not forgive him that day. Forgiveness, she had learned, was not a scene. It was not music swelling, not tears erasing ledgers, not a woman softening because a man finally understood pain after causing enough of it. Forgiveness might come one day, or it might not. But Alina no longer needed it to be free. Years later, when people told the story, they always sharpened it into legend. They said Alina Voss destroyed Adrian Blackwood in a single board meeting. They said she appeared like a ghost from his past and took everything. They said her revenge left him homeless and bankrupt. None of that was entirely false. But legends prefer lightning to architecture. They ignore the years of unpaid labor, the warnings, the hidden clauses, the mother's lessons, the father's letter, the courtroom humiliation, the unanswered disclosure requests, the baby's kick in the dark, the choice not to become cruel even when cruelty would have been easy. The truth was more abnormal than the legend. Alina did not rise because Adrian fell. She rose because she finally stopped carrying him. And Adrian did not become poor because Alina took his fortune. He became poor because the fortune had been built on debt's truth eventually came to collect. On Amara's 5th birthday, Alina hosted a small party in Camille's garden. There were paper lanterns in the trees, strawberry cake, and children running across the lawn with the wild seriousness of joy. Adrian attended for 1 hour, as agreed. He brought no extravagant gift, just a wooden puzzle shaped like a city. Amara opened it and frowned. Why is the city broken? Adrian smiled gently, because you're supposed to build it better. She considered that, then nodded as if the answer met her standards. Alina watched from beneath the old magnolia tree. Adrian looked over once. There was no longing in his expression now, no claim, no plea for the past to return and rename itself, only acknowledgement. Alina nodded slightly. Then she turned back to her daughter. Amara ran toward her with the puzzle clutched to her chest. Mama, help me build. Alina knelt, gathering her child into her arms. Yes, she said, but we'll build it strong. Above them, the lanterns moved softly in the warm evening air. Camille laughed somewhere near the roses. The city glittered in the distance, still hungry, still beautiful, still full of men who believed silence meant weakness and women who knew better. Alina looked at her daughter's face and thought of all the things she would teach her. Never confuse being chosen with being valued. Never make a home inside someone else's ambition. Never let a man call your strength difficult because he benefits from your doubt. And never forget that some women do not come back for love. Some women come back to collect everything they were owed. But the wisest ones know when to stop collecting from the past and start building what no one can take from them again.